I said I love being black. I said I love being black. I said I love the color of my skin. All right, I hate to ruin everybody's jam session, but I think we're gonna go ahead and get started. So hello, everybody. Good evening. We're gonna go ahead and get to it. I wanna take a moment to welcome you all to Organizing Through COVID-Capitalism. Thank you so much for joining us and being here with us in this tumultuous and heavy time. My name is Terry Smith, and I'll be co-moderating this discussion with Asha Ransby-Sporn. So before we get into it, I want to take a moment to say the names of those we've lost in the past several weeks and take a moment to acknowledge all of the Black and brown lives that have been taken by police and vigilante violence. Nina Pop, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Sean Reed, David McAtee. Rest in power. So I want to say a little bit about who we are and the type of space that we've envisioned for this webinar. The Data Liberation Project is a collaboration of the efforts of the Gen Forward Survey and Black Youth Project. In short, Gen Forward is a first of its kind survey of 18 to 36-year-olds that focuses on issues of importance to African American, Latinx, and Asian American young adults. Black Youth Project is a digital platform that is meant to amplify the voices of young Black people and is especially interested in understanding what new factors help to shape or contribute to the social and political attitudes and behaviors of African American youth. So we've merged these two to create what we're calling the Data Liberation Project. And the ultimate purpose of this project is twofold. First, we hope to sort of liberate data from the grips of academia and to prevent data from being siloed in the academy. Second, and perhaps more importantly, we hope that this project will further the use of data as a liberating tool for marginalized folks. And to achieve these goals, we want to think with and among activists and organizers and all who are invested in the liberation of marginalized people. So a little bit more about this space, and then we'll get to know our amazing speakers. So what we hope to do here is to take a step back and think about how we should understand this current moment of what we are calling COVID capitalism. We've brought together this amazing group of organizers and activists in order to think about sort of what we want from the state, what are the promises of socialism, the weaknesses of capitalism, and what does this all mean for movement work? Maybe more importantly, we want to think through the radical possibilities of this moment. So now I'll turn it over to Asha to introduce herself and our panelists, and then we'll go ahead and dive in.
Hi, everyone. My name is Asha. I live here in Chicago. I'm an organizer, Black queer feminist, abolitionist. And yeah, I'm really thankful to all of our panelists and everyone here to listen in this, what I feel like is an important and even more timely conversation than when we originally had envisioned it. So thank you. You know, I've been in the streets the past several days, as I'm sure many of our panelists and many attendees have been taking action in different ways. And yeah, really just hope that this conversation can kind of be rooted in what is going on in the immediate. So yeah, thanks. I'm gonna just go ahead and start introducing our panelists. First, we have Representative Rashida Tlaib, who is a well-known progressive warrior and, in her own words, a mother working for justice for all. Rashida made history in 2008 by becoming the first Muslim woman ever to serve on the Michigan legislature. She is beloved by her residents for the transformative constituent services she provided and for successfully fighting the billionaires and corporations that tried to pollute her district. When families get to know Rashida, they have no doubt that she will work tirelessly to knock down barriers for real change, and whether by policy or action, she will roll up her sleeves to make sure her residents are cared for, no matter how big the challenge. So thank you, Rashida, for joining us today. Next, we have Deatra Dee Jackson, who is an organizer, trainer, big sister, godmother of 4, and national director of BYP 100, someone I consider a close comrade. Thank you for being on. Born and raised in Southwest Philly, she moved to Durham from Miami, attended Cheyney University of Pennsylvania, the oldest historically Black institution for higher learning. While attending FIU in Florida International University, she became active at the height of the murder of Trayvon Martin and the George Zimmerman verdict with an organization called Dream Defenders. Dee Dee, former co-director of Ignite, works with young, Black, queer organizers in North Carolina and now across the country in her role as the national director of BYP 100. So thank you, Dee Dee, so much for being on, and it's good to see your face. Next, we have Asha Edwards, the other Asha, who is an undergrad attending UIC here in Chicago and is studying sociology. She's an abolitionist, artist, and feminist. She engages in community organizing and community building as a member of Assata's Daughters and has been involved in the No Cop Academy campaign and recently the hashtag We Are Dissenters campaign. In the future, she hopes for work in public health or at a community center on the south side of Chicago. I'm really excited to hear from Asha's, just brilliance, and is an awesome young activist and organizer. Hey, thanks for being here, Asha. Next, we have Kazembe Jackson, who is a Black, Southern, queer, and trans organizer. He believes in working across movements using a multi-tiered approach to ending systemic oppression. Kazembe is a commitment to loving himself so deeply that others are inspired to love themselves just as deep. That was really nice to read out loud. So thank you for that commitment, Kazembe. He lives and loves in Atlanta, Georgia. And last but not least, the homie Nanaya Amuchi, a diehard Black, left, genderqueer, feminist, and abolitionist, communist, organizer with Black Youth Project 100, published writer on police violence, and an attorney working to build movement lawyering infrastructure. They believe in a joyful and pleasurable future without police and prisons, where reproductive justice is actualized. All people who I have had the pleasure and privilege to learn from, and I'm so excited that we all get to do that today. Cool, so I just spoke a lot, and I'm gonna pass it just back to Terry for a couple of short logistical notes before we get into it.
There we go. All right, thank you, Asha. All right, so quick logistical note. We have some questions, of course, prepared that we want to discuss with the panelists. And then we'll take a moment to sort of look at some Gen Forward data and discuss its implications. And then we'll take some questions from you all. So feel free to send them in as they come to you. You don't have to wait until the end. So in order to do so, if you could send them in a private chat to the Gen Forward Zoom account. And if you're on Facebook Live, you can use the chat function there as well, and we'll have your questions queued up. So let's go ahead and get to it. Asha, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. So thank you for that, Terry. So first, I really just want to ask all of you to share with us, how are you doing in this moment? And how are you making sense of the political moment that we're in? Yeah, and I'm gonna ask Dee Dee if you wouldn't mind starting us off.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for having me. Yeah, I think the conversation is incredibly timely. So thank you for pushing forward and for everyone to be here. I am feeling pulled in many directions, as just a starter. I feel ignited and excited about the organizing and the protesting that's happening across the country, and that it's actually getting larger and larger. So that's exciting. It's opening up a world of possibilities, and also feel very conflicted in my role as a national director, which sometimes doesn't quite allow me to also be an organizer in this moment. So I feel like I really, really want to be an organizer and take advantage of this moment, while also doing the day-to-day responsibilities that come with being the national director of BYP 100. But it's a good challenge. It's a good problem that I have. So really grateful for that. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. Does someone else want to tell us how they're doing and how they're feeling in this moment?
Hello. Again, I'm Kazembe. I'm doing all right. I'm doing all right. I am feeling really inspired by a lot of the young folks that are in the streets for the first time. And it's making me remember when I was in the streets for the first time and just wanting them to be loved on and held in the same ways that I was held when I entered movement. And I think also just really inspired by what is possible right now. We watched the Minneapolis schools agree to cut off their relationship with the Minneapolis Police Department. And I'm like, what? Like, things that people said were unwinnable we're winning. So yeah, I'm feeling inspired too.
Thanks, Kazembe. How about you, Asha?
Hi, thank you guys for having me. This moment honestly feels like it has been like a roller coaster of emotions, because I was at some of like the protests, and though it was like kind of traumatizing and sad to see some of the violence that went down by the police, I also saw so much hope, like so many questions being asked, so many people like wanting to learn more about like abolition, what that is, how that kind of works, and kind of community resolutions to how we could solve our problems without policing kind of came to a main stage, which is so like amazing. This is a very pivotal moment right now. So I'm just trying to get more youth involved in organizing in Chicago. So I feel all right.
So, it's harder because I hear Dee Dee talking about I was just telling my team today, being out there last night as a legal observer with the National Lawyers Guild Detroit, Michigan chapter. It like felt good to be out there. And, even during legal observation, there was trauma and it was triggering. But I remember the first time I was arrested back in the day, or they detained me, how scared. And I remember at that moment, I forgot that feeling I had, which was I was more scared of not doing anything, if that makes any sense. So I just kept saying, well, I had to do something. And I remember being out there, for me, it was being out there on Palestinian rights with my family in the streets and after a gruesome attack on a refugee camp. But I know, like just now being in a very, very white suburb of my district, surrounded, there's only one African-American city councilwoman, Councilwoman Green. She's like, we got to do something. She's the only female and the only Black woman on council. There's no other woman, and all white men. And I was like, I'm going to go and I'm going to support her. And even just kind of looking around, we like cried together, we prayed together, we cried more. And then there was just an understanding that silence wasn't going to be an option, and that doing it outside of the city of Detroit specifically was so important. And I mean, we had, you know, people like coming to the parking lot, stopping to one guy who was very upset that we were protesting, and he had a veteran hat on. And I said, but you fought for us to have this freedom. And so, I don't know, I think at this moment, especially with who's in the office, the importance of dissent, and being out there. And again, I'm more fearful of not dissenting now and not pushing back, and what that would mean not to. So yeah, I mean, so it's anger, tears again, then, you know, this overwhelming sense of urgency to being out there as an organizer. So yeah, I appreciate the space we're in, even starting with the music. I was texting my staff just now, like, we need to start our staff meetings with music. Like, I was like, that was really, it actually centered me, because I just came back from that gathering for justice. So.
Nana, how about you? How are you doing, and how are you understanding this political moment?
Want to echo what folks said, feeling pulled many directions, but also feeling really grounded, but also feeling really excited, and reflective around, like, yeah, like some of the demands that are coming out, some of the targets that people are doing, the clear anti-capitalist and the clear abolitionist politics that are springing up out of all of these protests. Just like Dee said, the fact that there's more and more people every day, and that there's a culmination of like the external things that are presenting the conditions where young people are like hitting the streets. So feeling really excited about that. Feeling very cautious because we're in COVID-19, and figuring out, like, yeah, what are the additional infrastructures that we need in order to support folks who are out there. Yeah, and feeling very excited that like organizing really does create conditions to like move people to the next level. Like, without these last 6 years of organizing, like the narrative, you know, this time is not just about George Floyd, right? It's about like more than that. Like, before it's like, okay, justice for this person, but people are drawing the connections. And something I'm excited for is like, how do we also draw the connections of like what's happening here to what's happening globally, and not just be anti-capitalist, but also anti-imperialist.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you all for just sharing that with us. Feels important to ask people how they're doing in these times like these. So just to kind of add on to that question a little bit, and folks can chime in where they feel called to, but how are folks thinking about what is possible in this moment and what we're fighting for? Like, are there things that didn't feel possible before the virus hit that now do? Are there things that feel possible that didn't a week ago? So yeah, what feels possible right now, and what are we fighting for?
I mean, I don't know. I feel this strong pull now from folks saying things like let's divest in police, and I'm like, yeah. Or you know, even as I talk about it, people are starting to feel more welcomed at this moment, and like real structural change, not just condemnation and resolutions, and but like, yeah, maybe we should repeal the, you know, relentless pursuit money, you know, that gets people military type stuff. Maybe it's so racist now that we need to completely defund it. You know, that is conversations that people are having that I never expected to have. So.
Does anybody else want to share how they're thinking about what's possible in this moment, sort of what we're fighting for?
I feel like with COVID-Capitalism, like COVID-19 and capitalism, we've been shown like what the government can actually do. They have trillions of dollars, obviously, but like I believe over 700 billion goes to the military. However, we have so much money we could fund like necessities like healthcare. We could house all people if the government really wanted to. We could provide like proper school funding if we really wanted to. We have the money, but we've been shown like what the US's like priorities are right now. So I feel like we have more power to demand what we need in our communities right now. And when talking about like divesting from police, I've never seen it just reach such a mass scale so quickly. Like, yeah, let's defund the police and redistribute these billions in dollars into resources that like actually keep us safe.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. I think that's a great segue into our next question, and maybe you'll have something to say about it. But, you know, in our event title, we're calling this a moment of COVID-Capitalism. So when we're thinking about the vulnerabilities of capitalism, pushes for socialism, and sort of, we think about certain interventions such as Naomi Klein's disaster capitalism, what has the COVID-19 pandemic exposed about capitalism?
I think similar to what Asha was raising, I think the conversation around capitalism is growing in general. It's becoming more common language that is directly connected to the global pandemic and connected to the uprisings that are happening. I think that we get an opportunity to really interrogate and really start from capitalism of we do not have a healthcare system. We have a capitalist system that is providing a process for deciding who gets access to health and who doesn't, you know, and ultimately who gets an opportunity to live and who does not. And it also is where we can start from with criminal justice. With the criminal justice system, we do not have a criminal justice system. We have a capitalist system that is providing a process of deciding who gets punished and who does not. And so we get an opportunity in this moment to really start from there and really dig deeper and dig at the root of capitalism. And capitalism inherently is racialized, but we can say racial capitalism for the sake of this conversation. And folks are drawing the lines closer and closer and getting an opportunity to take a look at what's happening locally, to say, what would it look like? There was a time where we did not have police officers in our schools. And what made kids still able to go to school without police officers in them? And so we get to draw those lines and see what's actually happening, because anything that is for profit, it is because of capitalism, including our healthcare system, the hospitals, including the prisons, including the police departments, that they are there for profit. They exist to protect profit and property, and not human beings. And so I think that this COVID capitalism is drawing the lines deeper and deeper, and folks get a chance to connect with them on a very, very basic level.
Snaps to that, snaps to that. Thank you for that response. Does anybody have anything that they want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the exposing that capitalism, to like Dee and Asha's point, can't meet the needs of people, and that people are really suffering right now. Like, you know, there's this thing that, and maybe y'all have the data, that under 50% of Black adults are employed right now. Most folks are out of school, they're out of work, and so like they have time, and we're also recognizing that like there's more of us than they are of them. And if more and more people are organized, if more and more people are trained, then we actually can, and also have like the political vision about like what this system is and what we're up against, then like something more than this is possible. And I think, you know, particularly for folks who are hitting the streets for the first time, or people who are 16, 17, like they've lived through a lot of like fucked up shit that's happening in the world. And so, yeah, I think more and more people are, what's possible is more and more people will be willing to put their body on their line and confront a violent system.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. And on this note of people being willing to put themselves on the front lines, it makes me think about sort of this relationship between property and capital accumulation and capitalism. And property ownership and capital accumulation have been mechanisms that have propped up white supremacy since the inception of the country, and the police have been sort of unbending arms of that, right? So how might we think about the violent deployment of police in response to the destruction of property? I mean, like, we're seeing cop cars on fire, just like burning in the streets, right? We're seeing stores being broken into, people doing footwork on top of cop cars, like people are tagging buildings and monuments. Like, can we just take a moment to spell out what that means, and why are we seeing this as a response? Why are people turning to these things as a response to police violence? Kazembe, do you want to start us off maybe?
Yeah, I think, first of all, that property destruction is not violence. And the media has tried to flip it to where it is and have people asking questions like, why are people destroying property instead of why are Black people being killed by the police? Because I think that's the question. And I think as far as like why police are being deployed as a response to it, is because police protect property. That's what they do. They protect property, they protect capital, they protect the ruling class, all of which we have seen. And it's heartbreaking to me when people realize it in person for the first time at the first protest, that they actually don't care. They actually don't care about us. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm getting angry, but I think that yeah, like at some point our lives have to be valued more than property, and like I think that's the cry that is happening across the country right now. It's like, actually, our lives we're in defense of our lives. Like like the property, and some of the property that's been destroyed, like they took down the Rizzo statue in Philadelphia. Like it's historically racist, and monuments of the Confederacy and stuff like that are being taken down too, or that are being destroyed. And so I'm like, I'm all for it.
It's really deep. It's like capitalism is oppression, right? Like they actually make money. They made more money. The richest people made more money off of death of people during COVID than $400 billion. If you think about COVID, like capitalism is killing us. It is leading to a point where I think also people are, calling my office saying we need free healthcare. I'm like, yeah, I know. Or when are we going to get reoccurring payments? How come? Well, I don't know. How come y'all bailed out the airlines, but you're not bailing out us? And so, it is very clear that those that are really benefiting the most from our pain of oppression are those that really seek out to continue capitalism that is honest, directly leading to death. If you look at for-profit hospitals, if you look at just even what's happening in all of our systems, when the sister talked about, we didn't have police in our school. I didn't grow up with police in my high school. And when I tell young people that, like, y'all paying for drivers, I didn't have to pay for drivers. They had drivers we had a driver's license by the time we graduated from high school. They're like, say what? And when I tell them, no, we had all that. And people are also not really, like, all of that was sex. So if you look at mass incarceration, our education system, charters, if if you look at the healthcare system, like the hospital I grew up with here now, they say it's still a nonprofit, but you open the curtain, it's actually a for-profit entity that is making money off of what they did. And many of them are like, oh, we're losing all this money. And I'm like, how can you guys be losing so much money when there's more death and sickness and illness? Because we do have sick care, not health care in our country. But, it is very clear from everything that we've seen. From when I say oppression, I'm talking about racism. When I say oppression, I'm talking about, the pain that you're seeing and the hurt that we're seeing with all of our neighbors and folks. It is leading to a lot of that pain that we're all seeing. So a lot of folks are obviously focused on the knee, on George's neck, but that knee represents so much more of how that was created. And I really believe the more militant our police are, somebody's making money off of that. Somebody's making money off of our death and our illnesses and this form of oppression. There's a whole sector of our community, our neighbors, that will always be the low end workers, and it's intentional. And so if anything, COVID and even this uprising in our country it's showing its face a much more. I'm so fearful though that, as they try to suppress, throw it under the rug, they did this when I was young, folks. I was young once, where Rodney King and, folks know what I'm talking about. It always gets brushed aside because people don't want conflict. But it's those capitalists. I watch CEOs downtown Detroit all come together. These are the same people that benefited off of foreclosure of my neighbors. We've lost more Black home ownership in Michigan than any other state, 40%. And so and you see them standing up there saying, hey, we're against racism, but it's just words. It's not actual action. They actually benefit from a system called capitalism. And they became rich off of our oppression.
Yeah, I think also like these protests that are targeting property are really important, because like we're saying, property it's symbolic to capitalists. It represents their wealth. It represents exploitation. It represents business as usual. And so when you see folks looting, quote unquote, Target, and utilizing those resources to give it out to folks, to say like, oh, it's actually easy to just produce things and actually give people the things they need. We actually don't need these institutions, and we don't need these businesses that keep our countries going, but we actually need shared wealth. We need shared property. Even the concept, like agitating ourselves around the concept of private property. Like, why do people own buildings? Why do individual people own buildings? Why do individual people own businesses? And as long as people like have ownership over like these private properties, and there's always a need for exploitation, because somebody's going to be making profit off of that. And so I think I am pro targeting these buildings, whether it's AT&T or if it's Wells Fargo, or it's any of these corporations that are now putting out PR statements to act like they are for Black lives, but again, their wealth is built off the exploitation. The rich have gotten richer. And so I think, again, these places and these targets are symbolic to all the lost jobs that people are experiencing right now. They're symbolic to the lack of food that people have right now. They're symbolic to the lack of transportation people have right now. And so I think to Kazembe's point, like it is, a nonviolent, necessary like action and strategic, and there's a lot of thought that goes into this, and I don't think we should make light of it, and also not make us think that, again, property means more than Black lives.
Yeah, to go off of that, like I'm definitely like pro strategic looting, because when I was like downtown seeing the looting take place, they were targeting like the right stores downtown, and I feel like it's resistance against capitalism, because capitalism in itself is like the main goal is to have perpetual, profit growth annually. That's not human lives. So for capitalism to survive, it has to expand and exploit through any means necessary. So just like seeing how like right now it's just capitalism does not care about us. I feel like this is a mass resistance showing like this ain't for us, we need something new. So I'm just so happy to see like the rioting right now.
And also just to go off of that, like workers own, like people who work create the wealth also, right? So you're also taking back the things that you work for. Like capitalists don't work, they sit in their offices in their billion mansions and accumulate wealth and then push ideas around people working hard. So it's also symbolic to take back the things that you produce, even though you are only getting paid $6 or $7 an hour. So I think again, these are very symbolic and important actions.
Yeah, thank you all so much for breaking that down, and kind of sharing some of, you know, the meaning behind some of the tactics that we've been seeing. I think that's really important, especially as there are so many, you know, false narratives about why Black people are engaging in tactics that they are in this moment. So the next question I just want to ask is, how do, you know, everyone on the panel is a organizer in some way or another. How do you all see the role of organizations and also movements in this moment, right? You know, in some of the conversations I've been in the past few days that feel like weeks or months, you know, I've said like, you know, what's happening is bigger than what any of us could have coordinated, right? And so just as organizers, as people who are a part of organizations and a part of movements that, you know, existed before this moment, what are the role of those things in what's going on right now? I see you nodding, Didi, so I'm gonna nod it to you.
Yeah, I think it's multi-tiered. I think that there's one for BYP 100, we're a members-based organization and we exist across the country and we're Black and young for the most part. And so I think there's a role that we're able to play in terms of providing resources. By resources, I mean training, learning opportunities, community building opportunities with other young Black people that are experiencing something very similar, regardless of where you are in the country. For the most part, and most of our membership is in major cities, which has a particular energy when it comes to organizing and usually has a particular history. And so making sure that we are providing enough invitations for folks to be a part of a community that is committed to the freedom and liberation of Black people, but also a way for you to feel accountable to another grouping of people in your actions and in your strategy. It's not for us to say, well, we've been doing this thing in New York, so y'all just catching up. That doesn't help us, that doesn't serve us. And there's something very beautiful that we should hone in on the spontaneity that's happening, the organicness of young Black people that did not know, that had not heard of us, to be out in the streets, moving with some of the same language, some of the same things that we've been talking about, and some of the same interrogations that we have around capitalism, and around what is killing Black people in this moment. The other piece that we have, especially because we're in a global pandemic, is like tangible resources. And so providing money directly into the hands of our people, and providing materials, also material things.
Oh, she was in the middle of a good point. Oh, Didi, you froze for a minute.
Oh.
We heard you talking about providing material things for people, though, if you want to continue.
Okay, my fault. Can y'all hear me? Okay, good. Yeah, just providing like materials, providing cash into the hands of our people. And so that is the two kind of roles that we're filling up, is how can we provide the learning and the knowledge and the training that folks need to feel safe and to feel confident in what they're doing, and also be in deep community and provide the resources that folks really need at this moment. Just practicing like what we want the future to look like. Like that's what we're doing. Yeah, and yeah. I just have a point around, like, there was a thing I was listening to about museums, and thinking about what's in Nina's bio around like anti-imperialism and museums being a place of just a visual representation of colonization, of our histories, and people having to pay to learn about their histories, that a lot of those museums won't make it after this. And so that is another like opportunity for us, and for working class people and for people that that have not benefited from that history that has been placed in museums that we have to pay for to look at, to develop some new possibilities, and build our own museums.
Go ahead, Asha.
I've been learning like a lot through this whole process, and I learned about like the power of mutual aid in our communities, like solidarity, not charity. And it's been like fascinating just to see how our communities like created our own like social networks to like give mutual support to and like from each other. And like we did not have to, well, you know, the government is not going to support us. So it was pretty cool to see how people like gave their time, whether grocery shopping for elders or starting mutual aid funds for people who are out of work, like artists and stuff. So I also think like resisting and organizing in capitalism, when you talk about like ownership of property, I really find like there's power in gardening, like creating your own community garden for the neighborhood so our food can be more accessible and more free, to like get rid of like some food deserts around here and be able to like sustain ourselves in a way like capitalism has kind of taken from us, that we can really access basic necessities like food and water. That stuff costs money in a way.
Kazembe, are you about to say something?
Yeah, I was about to say something. I like echo everything Didi said, and I should. I wanted to add that I think it's important to give people, new people who are coming into movement in this moment. I think it's a role of organizations to give people meaningful things to do, to get them plugged in. I think it's very important what Dee said about not having the attitude of like, we've been here in these streets doing this for all this time and now y'all are here, but more like, welcome, and this is what you can do to get to work, to help us make this even bigger, and like letting people know that they are needed, like that we do need them, that we do want them. I think it's the role of organizations to train folks and stuff like that and provide strategy. But I think it's also about getting out in the street, listening to what the masses of people are saying that they want, and then being able to take the asks and turn it into strategy. Like not flipping what they say, but like being able to take what you hear in the street and make it strategic, if it's not, and help people have some kind of vision, to be able to see the vision for a new way of life.
Yeah, and I think to Kaz's point, like also learning from folks who are on the ground, right? There's things we can learn from. There's gaps in our movement and organizing that folks may have not felt compelled before this. to like join. So also being committed to like building deep relationships, because, you know, there's deep relationships, and being reflective and being like opening to listen, and also being open to like stepping back and being like, oh, this is like this is still organized, right? This is still organizing. It may be different, it may not fit because we don't have the framework of like what it means to organize, but also not like stalling, but also offering like lessons, right? Like today, like there was a whole, but like I think the other day Kamala Harris was at a protest. Today our DC Mayor Bowser was at a protest, even though she instituted a 7 p.m. curfew these last 2 days, which led to the police officers, police and National Guard kettling folks and pepper spraying folks in private houses and doing mass arrests in all these cities. And so also being there to like see the opportunities of like co-optation and like diffusion of like protests that we've seen in the past 6 years, to like make sure that folks are not being cited by that. Like we see a lot of police officers across the country adapting their tactics by taking a knee, or like listing out names, or like talking to folks. And so like making sure that we're not so hands off that we're like allowing the co-optation, but like we're also like pushing demands forward, we're pushing a vision forward, and like we have to build relationships in order for folks to also trust us to like move alongside with us. And so I think it's really important to also not to like tell the truth about like what's been happening for history, and not lie to our folks, but like be really honest and be really frank, and be like how Dee Dee says, and it goes back to like, I was watching something Angela Davis said a couple weeks ago, and she was like, we have to live in, be unfree in the, I mean, we have to be free, practice freedom in the unfree world. And so like making sure that we're also embodying freedom and not being caught up in the capitalist, like it has to be this way or that way or whatever, while also like, just finding the balance. I think finding the balance and like making sure that this opportunity, which is building off of the 2012, 2014, doesn't get like co-opted.
Thank you all for sharing that brilliant knowledge. That's extremely helpful. And I think it's really great at a time like this where a lot of people are being politicized. A lot of people are coming into the movement and looking for ways to channel their frustrations and their anger. And I'm hearing a lot of you talk about strategy and lessons and frameworks. So I want us to take a moment now to turn to some data from Gen Forward, and hopefully it will give us sort of a working structure, right? So I'm going to use the famous Zoom line. I'm going to share my screen with you all. Give me 1 second. All right, can everybody see my screen? Cool. Alrighty, so I said a little bit about Gen Forward earlier, but I want to say a little bit more just to give us some context and just in case you missed it. So again, Gen Forward is a bi-monthly survey of millennial attitudes, specifically 18 to 36-year-olds. It's a nationally representative survey, and it's able to disaggregate by race, ethnicity, gender, income, and region. Essentially, the survey is able to sort of tease out the discontinuities that might exist between these categories. And lastly, the frequency of this survey allows it to remain current and topical, mostly in a way that focuses on the lives and futures of young Black people and people of color. So here's our first data point, and it's from the most recent survey. So what are we looking at here? When asked about the most important issue facing the country today, COVID-19 was strongly named #1 across all racial groups. And I think the significance of this will become evident later, perhaps even with the next slide. So let's look at this. Prior to COVID-19, racism and immigration have consistently been named as the #1 issue in America for Black and Latinx young adults. Now we know that COVID disproportionately impacts marginalized communities, right? So how are we to think about the fact that essentially since this survey began, the #1 issues among Black and Latinx young adults were racism and immigration. And now the #1 issue is COVID, which is certainly informed by and has dynamic implications for race and immigration, right? So let's keep that in mind going forward. So earlier we mentioned and sort of dove into the weaknesses and vulnerabilities of capitalism and some promises of socialism. Well, in this survey, respondents from every group except white young adults show support for socialism over capitalism. And actually, Black young adults are 10 points more likely to support socialism. So we see strong support among Asian Americans and Latinx respondents as well. And then we see a majority of white respondents favoring capitalism. And I think these next two slides help us to dive into that a bit more. So when asked about support for universal basic income, there are high levels of support across the board. And maybe most notably, the majority of Black respondents reported strong support for UBI. So universal basic income is not just something that young Americans are thinking about, it's something that they strongly support as well. And I want to take a moment to talk about notions of decarceration. There are debates, arguments, conversations, both in favor and against abolition. There are people across the country, across the world really, who right now are fighting for and demanding the release of those who are incarcerated. And what Jen Ford has found in this survey is that there is support across all racial groups. There is support for the release of folks who are incarcerated. And the thing is, this support doesn't exist just during the pandemic, but it's also support for the release of those incarcerated after the pandemic as well. So when we are thinking about organizing through and beyond COVID capitalism, let's just sit with the fact that many young Americans do in fact support decarceration efforts. Some of them anyway. So I want to end with this slide because I think it's not only the most relevant to this discussion, but also relevant and sort of fruitful for the types of conversations that we should continue to have. When asked about the best way to make racial progress, most young adults in the survey said that we should be organizing in communities. But what I think is really interesting here, and what I think even sort of props up this discussion of radical possibilities, is the fact that among Black respondents, revolution is the next most cited way to make racial progress. Revolution, and so collectively, let me stop sharing really quickly if I can get this thing closed out. Collectively, this data shows us the radical potential of organizing in this moment, right? And I want to turn back to our speakers and just ask, we see in this survey significant support for decarceration, universal income, socialism, and revolution. So how and to what extent is this helpful for our organizing? How does that change our approach and our vision? And how does it help us to sort of re-envision what is possible in this moment?
Can I just go?
Oh, yeah.
No, you know what's interesting, because I don't know if you know, Democrats look at polling all the time. It drives me nuts. And so every time they go through this stuff, the first thing I think about is, when it gets to things of what the result would be. So for instance, you ask people about socialism versus capitalism, but then you got a huge difference in universal basic income. It's because they don't understand, capitalism is preventing you from getting closer to universal basic income kind of proposals. And I think it's that connectivity. So sometimes even when I talk about my automatic boost to communities act, which would give people $2,000 per month during the pandemic, everyone, no matter your state, anybody that's in the United States would get access to it. Everybody goes, well, people get hung up on minting the coin. What are you I said, well, I'm creating an asset to do it. They're all for the result of it, but they're that sounds weird. I don't know about that. So I just want to put it out there. It's so conflicting what I hear about, well, I'm for universal basic income. I'm for, addressing mass incarceration. I'm for all these things. But then when it comes to the way it's labeled, and I really do think it's because of how some of these isms are the thing that just paralyzes people, and they don't want to put a name to it. They just want the result of it. Does that make any sense? I don't know.
I think we have to practice using our visionary muscle more. I know we do a lot of visionary practices and stuff like that, where we're like, what can we actually achieve? And I think this moment is showing us that, like, I said it before, like the things that people said were not winnable, we're winning. And so if we dream big and we have bold visions, I think, the fact that the second answer was revolution for Black people makes me excited. I'm like, oh, well, people are always talking about they not ready for revolution and this and that. What clearly the numbers don't lie. That's what they said. So, I feel excited. I feel excited about the possibilities of organizing in this moment, especially when people are putting together the intellectual kind of idea of revolution and putting their bodies in the street. It's like it's connecting, and it's something that I guess we call praxis, of kind of like putting them together. And I'm excited to see it. I love to see it, is what the young folks say.
I also think it presents an opportunity, right? Like we get to where we're at through also deep study. And also, we live in a capitalist system, and so much of the way that we're socialized and learn in school is to not critically think. So much of what we do is like we read something and we take it as fact. And so people who are maybe younger can see the contradictions a little bit more, but like folks also need to be trained on like critical thinking skills, and like also like study and like reading to like come along, because also there's this narrative around like, oh, we're doing socialism. It's like, no, we're not doing socialism. We're living in a capitalist system, and like we are like, there's like some tinkers here that the capitalist system is giving us, but that's not actually socialism. And socialism is actually our relationship with labor, right, and with the state. And so I think it presents an opportunity that people are curious and people are interested. And so like, what are the things that people need to learn, and what are the things we need to learn in order to like draw those to close those gaps. But I do know there's like a growing left, young folks. Like I talk to 14-year-olds who are like, I'm Marxist. There is like a growing left of folks, and part of that is the internet and access to information and access to see the contradictions. But on the other hand, there's also so much misinformation on the internet, and so much lies on the internet. And so again, it's an opportunity to like provide folks skills.
Thank you both for that answer. And of course, if any of you want to answer that question, you can, but I want to bump something up because Dr. Barbara Ransby made a good point in the chat. We're talking about we're excited for revolution, but how are we defining revolution? What does that look like to you all?
Revolution to me kind of looks like a society where we don't have to like pillage or exploit or like use militarism in a way to get access like to the resources we need to live and sustain ourselves. I believe a revolution would be like shelter will be free, food will be free, water will be free, because it's the community that creates it, like small communities around like the entire country. But also I think a revolution would mean the US would not exist in a way, like we would give like indigenous sovereignty. I think that's very critical in revolution as well. And that these power structures are completely dismantled and don't function to serve white supremacy anymore. And I feel like it would just be a more happy time because we wouldn't have to live our days just going to work and going back home. Like that's not living in this society.
And I'll read a quote that I came across by Lorenzo Camboa Erwin. And it was basically a quote around like the difference between like rebellion and resurrection and revolution. And I think revolution is like an ongoing process. It's a process of changing our minds. It's a process of changing the environment around us. It's a process of changing systems. And so it says, But what is it's called insurrection, but what is a rebellion and how does it differ from an insurrection? An insurrection is a general uprising against the power structure. It is usually a sustained rebellion over the course of days, weeks, months, or even years. It is a type of class war that involves a whole population in an act of armed or semi-armed resistance. Sometimes mistakenly called a rebellion, its character is far more combative and revolutionary. Rebellions are almost totally spontaneous, short-term affairs. An insurrection is also not the revolution, since revolution is a social process rather than a single event. But it can be an important part of the revolution. Maybe it's the final phase. An insurrection is a planned violent protest campaign which takes the spontaneous revolt of the masses to a higher level. Revolutionaries intervene to push rebellions to insurrectionary stage and the insurrection and to a social revolution. It is not small isolated pockets of urban guerrillas taking action unless those guerrillas are part of a larger revolt. But yeah, I think there's like differences between the insurrection, the rebellion, and the revolution. And like revolution, again, it's not a one-time thing, even though we often think about like we're in the revolution, but it's like a process. We got to change our minds. I think a revolution is when the masses of folks have transformed their minds and the conditions around them. And so we're in a different world, a different state of beings.
I'm going to just ask a quick follow-up to you, Nena, before we get to the audience questions, which is, with those definitions that you shared, is there a place that you see some of what we, are in the midst of now?
Yeah, I think we're between a rebellion and insurrection. I don't think we're quite at insurrection. I think, but I think some things to like assess is that one, this the number of like uprisings in the last 6 years, and also like the heightened stage of this rebellion, like we were talking about. Like one, the messages are clear, right? It's not just about like one person, it's about this like larger system. People are drawing connections between imperialism, capitalism, and policing and the things of their needs. I think also like when we're talking about the property stuff or the symbolic protests, like people are targeting specific places. I think also, there's definitely a more robust like abolitionist politic. Folks are more willing to confront the police in ways that we haven't seen. And so I think, and then we also have like organizations, right? And so we have like 50 states, all across the country, there's a protest and uprisings happening all across the country. And that's due to like also like the organizing that has been done for the last 6 years. So I think there's like somewhere between like rebellion and insurrection.
Great, thank you for that. That was really important addition, I think, to the conversation. So I'm going to turn it to or lift up some questions that came up in the chat and in the Q&A. So first, there was a question, I guess, to expand on or maybe spell out for folks what the connection between anti-Blackness and imperialism as well as immigration issues is. So Nena and Didi, I know that's something that each of you both touched on, but maybe if you could maybe just dial it back and explain that connection for folks a little bit, whoever wants to take it.
Sorry, you said the connection between what? Anti-Blackness and what?
And imperialism.
Imperialism.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think one connection is like one of the most, over the course of like over 10 years, the US has created hundreds of military bases through AFRICOM across the continent. And that increased again under Obama. Under Obama, within the first year of Obama's like presidency, he bombed more countries than Bush did through his whole presidency. And then there's, top 3 countries, and one of those countries is Somalia. And so that's like a direct connection between like the types of countries that are being targeted. Even when we talk about the ban, what are the countries that are being targeted? Those are countries that are predominantly Black. Yeah, I think countries like Venezuela, countries like Cuba, those are also more countries that are like have large Black populations and have like large Black uprisings. Haiti, Didi, I'm gonna give it to you to have like a more explicit connection. But I think when we think about who's targeted, like when we see who's increasing at the borders in the US, it's mostly like climate change or climate refugees that are coming from predominantly Black countries, because Black countries, specifically on the continent, are the countries that are being pillaged by the US, right? Those are where the exploitation of resources are happening most on the African continent. Raw materials, whether that's diamonds, whether that's gold, whether that's oil. My family is from Nigeria, and one of the largest crises right now is in the Niger Delta, which is in the southeast of Nigeria. And people are being displaced because there's oil spills every day because of Chevron, and that's a direct result of the US and its allies trying to exploit resources. And when we think about imperialism, when we think about war, and to Asha's point around like capitalists have to keep getting more money, and imperialism is like the highest stage of when like capitalists are uniting across the countries to exploit and get more money. And the way you get more money is by going to war. And so you have to go get oil from places like Nigeria in order to fuel more war and get more weapons. And so, yeah, we see the deep exploitation on the continent, and we see an increase of militarization happening on the continent with specific targets and like countries like Somalia. And so I think there's a direct connection there between anti-Blackness. And we also see that in this country, one more thing, like, you know, there was a police murder of this Eritrean man a few weeks ago in Silver Spring, Maryland, named Fanan Burher. And a lot of Black migrants that are targeted by police violence are the same Black migrants that are targeted in their home countries by US imperialism. So again, drawing the connection between that.
Yeah, I think, yeah, just to add on to what Nena is saying, thinking about here, the part of Philly that I grew up in, Southwest Philly, has a pretty high Liberian and Nigerian immigrant population. And a couple years ago, there was a huge fire that happened in Southwest Philly, and the folks that unfortunately lost their lives in that fire were Liberian, Nigerian immigrants, and the houses were less than a block away from a fire department and less than a block away from a police department. And there was a huge uproar of this, and folks took to the streets, and just thinking about just the lack of acknowledgement, firstly of these people, but also that folks were actually worried about actually taking to the streets around what was happening because because they were undocumented and things like that, and out of fear for further criminalization and further worsening their lives more than it's already been after losing their home and losing their families. And this is a regular thing that happens here in this country, and it's been and because folks were forced to really have to reconcile with this on their own. They were stifled from really being able to try to build with the community and try to prevent this from happening, but also interrogate the fact that this fire could have gotten so that the fire could have gotten so large that they lost their lives while being in very, very close proximity to the very resources that's supposed to prevent this from happening. And so that, just to name that of here in this country, and also, and thinking about Brazil has a huge percentage of Black Brazilian folks that are being murdered by the police every day. I think it's some wild statistic. I think it's multiple times in a day statistically that a Black person is a Black Brazilian person is being murdered in Brazil, and so we're able to, in organizing, being able to really draw those connections and build solidarity, with those people.
DD, that happens to me all the time, but my kids are not with me right now. I have a big family, but they're not here all the time.
So we have a couple of questions in the chat that are pretty similar. So I'll kind of merge them together. So people are wondering, what are y'all's opinions about the quote unquote destruction or looting of small, local, and or POC ran businesses? These owners seem to be very upset that their businesses were targeted during the looting. So what are our thoughts about that?
I don't, I'm in, in Detroit. I was out there doing legal observation. Today, the protest is even larger. That's not happening. And I just feel like, happening or not, and, I hear Aisha, I hear everybody talking about this because I get asked about this a lot. Like, oh, what do you think? And, one of the key things is stop focusing on that and ask, the what is happening that is causing this kind of rage, or what is, and again, it's also this idea around, even here, there was no need for a curfew, but everybody, oh my God, we got to protect the property in downtown Detroit, much of which were all public subsidized, tax breaks, while we can't even get clean drinking water for our Detroit public schools. And so, I push back and say, of course you're upset, be upset, but like act. Let's address this. Take that rage, take that, it's just like even the pandemic. People are like, oh my God, the pandemic. I'm like, was the pandemic anybody's fault? No. At this stage, though, what's happening with businesses and everyone is, there is something you can do to try to end this, and take action to address that kind of rage and what is happening. But I also feel like so much focus on that, where I maybe because here I haven't seen it. And all I see is just people saying, we need to stop, we need to demilitarize, we need to have real structural change. It was beautiful. I was watching before I got on this, like the list of demands of urgency of like, this is what we need to see from young Black youth in Detroit. It's an 85% Black city. And no, it's 85% Black city. You don't see all these like images that you see. And that's something that nobody is video recording or capturing the asks that happens every night here. They focus on this other. So, and I think that is the whole, that's, media control, the capitalism and media are, so I don't know. I know that doesn't answer the question. I just think that it should begin a conversation that you have with these small businesses, right? A really deep conversation about the what is happening what is this disease that is in our country right now.
Yeah, I absolutely agreed. I was like, when I was looking at the looting taking place, honestly, I felt like people were using the looting as a distraction because for a lot of the places that were looted on the south side of Chicago, I noticed were not owned by Black people, or it was owned by people of color who have been extremely anti-Black to a lot of the residents there. So I think the media is also not showing like how there's been a lot of cleanups in the community, and there's been funds created to address like some more community issues. Like there was, I believe, 2 gangs that kind of like united. Instead, they would stop like beefing for a short time. So with looting, I just still feel it's like resistance to capitalism, but I feel like we still need to be strategic about it. And when you look at looting, I've noticed people have mainly been stealing food, clothes, shoes, and these are necessities. These are things that we need, that people who like are low income or just can't afford it, they need right now. So they should take it. And I just feel like looting is a distraction the media is using to call us violence. And even then, looting is not the majority of people who's protesting, but I still condone like most looting. And I feel like we should also look at the deeper causes of what's leading to this rage, where to channel our rage into organizing.
I think that one effect of one of the symptoms of capitalism is individualism. You think and prioritize based on what your proximity is to what you need and what you have and what you've been able to acquire. And I think that time and time again, what these rebellions, with these uprisings is pushing us to be thinking about is, how do we practice being free currently? How do we practice the other side of the world that we want to live in? And I think that it's a question for us to continue to navigate. I feel like it's a similar thing for folks that were coming into the movement at the time of 2012, 2013, 2014, where it was so prominent in our media of Black on Black crime. And it was like, well, what up? Y'all are saying Black Lives Matter, but do they matter to each other? We need to get ourselves together. It was that kind of thing, a similar kind of vein that is a distraction and also not really getting to the root of what's really happening. And so I think that my response in terms of especially Black, Indigenous, people of color, owned small businesses is, how can we be in this moment creating a new way for you to even have a business that is centering the community and centering the people that need the resources that you are wanting to provide. But there's also a level of reciprocity and not just exploitation and not just I have and so you need, and there's a more communal relationship. And that to me is also a way of how we practice Black queer feminism.
Perfect segue into our next question. Someone wants to know, what insights does Black queer feminism bring to our understanding of this current uprising, and how should it impact our organizing?
Yeah, I think one thing that it brings is that policing is also a gender-based issue. It's policing. I mean, policing facilitates gender oppression, right? I think we're a little bit better this time about naming the folks who have been impacted by police violence. But oftentimes when we think about people who are murdered by police, it's usually like out in front somewhere in public. But we don't talk about the ways that police officers commit acts of sexual violence, which is one of the main ways that that police officers violate and terrorize Black women and girls and non-binary folks. And I think a Black queer feminist lens allows us to think about who are the groups of people who, even within the Black community, are further marginalized. How can we apply a gender analysis? How can we apply a class analysis? How can we provide a disability justice analysis? How can we tackle transphobia, right? We have an incident in Minneapolis of a Black trans woman who was attacked by other Black folks. And so it draws the connection that this is not just something of the state's doing, but how do we replicate the state in our communities? How do we perpetuate gender-based violence in our communities? And how do we also not use the police and prisons as a response to gender-based violence? That's something that we in BYP 100 are fighting against through our She Safe, We Safe campaign, is drawing the connection that a lot of Black women and girls and non-binary folks who are incarcerated are survivors of violence. And the minute that they're arrested, they are being searched, they're being violated, they are being sexually assaulted. And these are also the ways that the state oppresses us. It also calls us to think about reproductive oppression, right? We have somebody who was pregnant who was just murdered by the police. And so what does it mean to be able to have children, and the police, and the idea of police making it so that you may not feel safe having children in this world, or it may impact your pregnancy because you are dealing with the emotional and mental impact of policing and thinking about how your, what your children are going through. So I think policing is also a reproductive justice issue. It also impacts the ways that we think about if, when, and how we want to parent. And so I think that Black queer feminist lens asks a lot more deeper questions than like, oh, there's just a police murder, but what are all the different ways that police violence impacts our communities and our ability to live freely?
That was nothing short of an amazing response. Thank you for that. That just, I feel like that really sort of solidified understanding the radical potential of this moment, and how we're organizing and who we're thinking about, and you know, how we're thinking about what's possible. So thank you for that. Does anybody else want to add to that? Kasembe, I don't know if you wanted to say something.
No, I believe in adding to something when I have something actually to add, and Nina killed that. So I'm gonna let it be.
Did, definitely did, yeah, for sure.
Okay, I'm gonna just jump in with, I think, our last question from the audience, which, you know, this is an important one in this moment for sure. But yeah, just for folks to answer, how do you, well, this is two questions combined, but they're related. How do you stay hopeful? And how do you work on your own mental, spiritual healing and the healing that your communities and loved ones need? So yeah, how do you maintain hopefulness as well as healing for yourself and your communities?
I heard a quote from Miriam Kaba that was like, hope is a discipline. And I'm trying to kind of learn how that works. But seeing like these last few days have given me a lot of hope, just seeing how people have come together in a way to support each other. Like people have been checking in on me, I've been checking in on people. And I think like keeping hope right now is, we have to keep hope. Like it might seem kind of scary for a lot of people, but giving yourself the freedom to imagine kind of gives me a lot of hope. Like this doesn't have to be like how it is right now, and you can build a new future if you like help build it with your family. Because like in my opinion, the revolution starts at home. So like mental health wise, I've noticed from a lot of groups I've been working with, we've gathered in like debriefs, and I found that so helpful to like just release all of the frustrations throughout the day and to like lean on somebody. Well, not literally because COVID, but you know, it's been helpful just to talk it out and have people check on you. Like that's so important right now.
I think for me, I have a lot of friends that have kids, and I have 4 godkids. And yesterday, I was able to have like an hour and a half long conversation with one of my friend's daughters, who's 8 years old. And she watched the video of what happened to George Floyd. She also watched the video of what happened to Breonna Taylor and was able to recount what happened. And her mother just was having a really hard time talking to her about this moment. And so I was able to just talk to her like, how do you feel when you see the police? And she was like, you know, I feel like they're not doing their job. And it's like, okay, what's their job? And she's like, they're supposed to take care of people. And I was like, right. And so what happens, you know, when you see them, and she just knew how to just articulate what she was feeling in a way that was just connecting to what's happening in the world around her. And she said, you know, Black people, we deserve to live too. We deserve to live too. And it just was everything. And I just held that and was, you know, very affirming to her that she's incredibly smart. And I'm not, you know, we're not talking to you about this to scare you, but it is because you need to know these things. And she was like, I want to be a kid forever. Like, it was just, you know, it was just, but it was, that just brought so much life to me, of like, this is a baby that I watched be born, to be with her in this moment and really be talking to her through it and answering her questions. So if anybody has a child that they are struggling with talking about this moment with, please, please hit me up. I got y'all. I got you.
Yeah, thank you both for those responses. And yeah, it just sounds like, you know, the answer is each other, right? So that's beautiful. Okay, so we are just about at time, but before I let you all go, I just want to ask if our panelists could do a go around and share with those who have tuned in on the Zoom and on the Facebook Live, what are some ways that folks can be taking action, caring for their communities, moving us a little closer to this revolution that, you know, young Black people know that we need. So yeah, some action steps. And there was a question about specifically new young organizers who maybe can't be in the streets right now for whatever reason. So both and yeah.
Well, I don't know. I just want everybody to pass all the bills I introduced, but um, but no, really, I think, you know, as we continue to push forward these various actions, I think really talking about poverty in the same breath that we talk about transformative change, and we talk about all these isms and everything. But it's real, all of the pain that's happening. But I feel like when we switch it, the power will shift if we really dive into or really try to tackle it in poverty. But yeah, no, I have a bill that would literally, all I did was repeal the big tax break that Trump did for the rich. Because everybody's like, how are you going to pay for it? I said, I flipped it because that was just a shareholder payment plan that he put forward that didn't even help real folks. And the way we did it is we get $3,000 to $6,000 to everybody. And they say it's closest to universal basic income you're going to get, but well, we can get more, but it would uplift instantly. 45% of our neighbors would be uplifted from poverty like that. So as Aisha said, freedom, imagine, you know, that possibility. And yeah, there are just really powerful, transformative policy changes that are out there. But I do want you all to know, I know it's COVID and everything, but like real direct human contact is so critically important. So yeah, you might not want to march out in the street, but connecting to people in a real human way is so critically important to strengthening the movement like this right now, or even the uprising. Is never underestimate that that power of that kind of connectivity that can happen. It's really important because you know, a pastor in my district said, you know, we're not divided in our country, we're disconnected. And I believe that so much, so more now than even ever, that, you know, through collective action, through collective kind of really being able to feel like we can, you know, can transform this together side by side is really important. So yeah, but I really mean it. Like, they should pass all my bills and we'll be good for a while.
I think there's like a lot. Oh, okay. I was just gonna say there's a lot of need right now. Like, people are struggling right now, and so like I think that one of the things we can do is take care of each other. There's a lot of organized mutual aid networks in folks' local cities, and so like providing food for folks. Like, I know there's like been attention shifted, but also like providing food for folks, providing, you know, safe transportation. I am not super encouraging folks to be out there. I do think COVID-19 is like a real serious thing, and like, you know, we already have folks who are like showing symptoms now that they've been out. And so like, what is also the healthcare infrastructure that we need to be building? Like, are folks doctors? Are folks connected with medics? Like, are there testing centers that can be created? Are there like best practices that folks can be created? Are there fundraising that can be done for goggles or you know, really high quality masks and gloves? Or can people set up washing stations at protests? You know, there's like so many things to like also combat this COVID-19. I also think that folks should like start like study, like read things, you know, find out what are things to read, what are organizations to connect with. Yeah, I know there's like a lot of excitement to like join organizations, and like there's like, yeah, I think one thing that folks have been pushing also is like writing to incarcerated folks. Like if there's nothing that you can do right now and you're at home, like writing letters to incarcerated folks, because I'm also thinking about like even with these mass arrests, that means there's more COVID-19 going in and out of these prisons and jails, and like folks who are incarcerated can't actually leave the jails. And so how are we also supporting folks behind bars? And yeah, you can follow, I guess, BYP100 too. Also follow local campaigns. There's a lot of local campaigns in DC. We have a campaign to stop the construction of a new jail, so you can follow us at No New Jails DC. You can also follow us at Decrim Now DC. There's a lot of ask around the country. Another thing is budget season, so folks can look at their local budgets and look at like how much your cities are spending on policing and where can that money go instead. So there's a lot of things folks can be doing.
To bounce off of what you just said, that's amazing. I would say like in Chicago, there's been a lot of mass release now campaigns, and also a majority of campaigns like to redistribute funding of the police, because CPD, the Chicago Police Department, receives like over $1.8 billion a year, and that's like around $4.6 million a day. So there's like a call for like defunding the police, and there's a campaign called Police Free Schools, because the Chicago public school system has a $33 million contract with the Chicago Police Department. So a lot of community organizers are calling to demand that they terminate that contract for the upcoming year. And also for like people who are at home, there's like so many hyper local initiatives that you can start or contribute to, like even simple as posting where you can get food or where you can get masks on like your Instagram story. A lot of people, including myself, have been just posting like, you can go here, you can go here. And also people have been providing transportation through areas, because our mayor restricted transportation, and that's not been helpful for people. So I guess like a call to action is just get more involved directly in your neighborhood and building relationships with your people.
Yeah, I would just add that we're in the middle of a week of action with the Movement for Black Lives. And so you can go to m4bl.org to see what those actions are for the next couple of days. And I would say find your squad. If it's BYP100, whoever it is, that's my squad, even though I'm too old. But find your squad and then skill up, get trained, read. That'll also help you find some hope too, because you'll realize that our people have been through, it might not be the same situation, but our people have so much resilience and tenacity, and we've been through a lot of things, and we've come out on top, and we'll continue to.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'll add is there is a resource that's like 26 things to do if you can't protest. I was trying to find the link to it, to drop it in the chat if anybody finds it. But it's written by organizers and folks that are committed, especially to the disability movement. But they wrote a list that they wrote it a few years ago, but it's definitely something worth utilizing now. If folks are not able to are not able to actually protest. So.
Awesome. Thank you all for those action steps. Definitely encourage folks to, be taking action, get involved. Like folks said, find your squad and look up definitely the links that were shared. And I'm gonna just kick it to Terry to close us out for the night. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for sharing those ways to get involved. I think we'll send out a follow-up email with even more ways to get involved and maybe some reading recommendations. And if you have any questions, email us. It's dataliberationproject@gmail.com. I just want to say a final thank you to everyone who made this possible. Our brilliant, brilliant, brilliant speakers. Thank you all so much. I've learned so much. I know everyone else has. And I'll be ending this call feeling so much better than I did before. So thank you for sharing this space with me. Thank you to Irby Kumba and Jonathan Likes for helping us get those questions queued up. And thank you to all of you who have tuned in and shared this time and space with us. We're thankful and grateful to have been in conversation with you all. And if you want to keep up with us, I dropped our social media into the chat. We'll send that out again. And take care, everyone. Thank you and stay safe.
Thank you.